Hello and welcome to Half Moon, a creative exploration of healing and human consciousness. And today I am so excited to bring you an episode coming from the Sequoias. This weekend I was in the Sequoia National Park exploring and being present with the sequoia trees, and it was so beautiful to be immersed in this nature. And this episode is a little bit different, I guess, because I guess all of them have been a little bit different, and we've really covered some broad ground here in the first season of Half Moon. But in this episode, I do something a little bit differently. I was actually recording it while sitting inside of a sequoia tree, and I went into what I like to call a channel. You probably are familiar with this if you listen to Half Moon, if you're resonating with Half Moon. But one thing I really like to do is just pick up the energy of whatever I'm surrounded by, maybe the trees, maybe whatever I'm feeling. But in this case, I was really tapping into the tree. And this is really significant for me. I talk about this in this episode because I was in Sequoias a year ago, and it's a ritual that I like to try to do once a year. I've been to Sequoias a few other times before this one, but I'm really going to be intentional now to be present in the Sequoias at least once a year in the fall. I just find that this is a really powerful time to reset, and I really like to embody that element of ritual and really making a habit of doing the same thing again and again. Before we get into the channel, I would love to take a moment to invite you again to check out the Spiral Seminar, which is a free 1 hour seminar that comes with a worksheet, and it introduces you to my framework called the Spiral Studies. If you haven't listened to the Spiral Studies podcast episode, make sure that you check that out as well, because I am hosting a 13-week spiral ceremony where we will be completing the spiral studies together. And it's actually really interesting that this is coming into fruition. I feel like everything is pushing that way because I was just on the phone with a friend who was talking to me about how essentially most problems are relational. And he was talking to me about a study called Rat Park, I believe, which you might be familiar with, but if you don't, the premise essentially is this. First, researchers were trying to study cocaine and how people got addicted to cocaine and if cocaine itself were an addictive substance. So what they did was they added cocaine to a water bottle. I hope that I can say this on Spotify. I'm pretty sure I can, but basically they added it to the water bottle and then the rats became addicted. They were just alone in isolation and they kept coming back and back and back because this preyed on their dopamine pathways. Now, from this research, the researchers drew a conclusion. Cocaine is an addictive substance and it preys on our dopamine pathways. But later, researchers were like, hey, maybe there's more to the story because rats are really, really social creatures. So they put these rats in this park where they had many other rats to play with, they had activities, and they had an overall really happy environment. Now, when this happened, the rats would occasionally, go to the water bottle with some cocaine, but they didn't demonstrate any of these patterns of addiction or dependence. And on the phone, we were talking today about this idea that every single problem is fundamentally relational, that humans are actually relational or social creatures, and that I can't remember exactly how he articulated it, but it was basically saying that, like, we essentially can't heal in isolation. We heal when relationships are demonstrating and healing a certain pattern that we experienced. So an example is the fear of abandonment. So if you've been abandoned, you probably have the fear of abandonment until you enter into a relationship where somebody isn't preying on that fear anymore. Maybe you act a certain way and the person gets upset, but they say, look, I'm staying with you. I'm sticking around. And that's what my friend was basically saying today, is that you can't really heal the issue until you experience the opposite of that. And you know what? This person studies psychology, and I honestly talk a lot on this podcast about this idea that truth is not monodimensional, it's a spiral or a fractal that intersects all planes of existence. And when this is the case, we continue to expand and expand and expand because we understand that when we perceive something, let's say, for example, as a spiritual truth or a karmic truth, we can understand that in the same vein, there's also a psychological truth. There's also a biological truth. That truth isn't this one singular point, but it is something that is interconnected and it's a pattern across all domains or all planes of existence. So I think about this in this context and in the context of the spiral studies itself, because what I really have been feeling called to and really craving is to make a connection, make a sort of community, a class. If you don't already know this, I'm not sure if I talked about this on this podcast, but I actually was an educator myself. I actually have my master's degree in urban education, policy, and administration, and I have 3 years of experience in education being a full-time high school teacher. That might come as a surprise to some of you, but yes, that's how I spent the beginning of my 20s, and it was the best thing I ever did. It completely changed my life. It made me who I am today, and it also taught me the importance of connection and creating a community and creating a culture where people want to learn and grow together. It's been 3 years since I was a teacher, and I actually never stopped missing that feeling and that sense of community that comes when you have your own classroom. And that's what inspired me originally to create Half Moon Academy. And Half Moon Academy was something that took place for a few months. I think it was 6 or 7 months. And it was a very small community of people, and we would meet for monthly workshops. And really, I think what I'm missing in that regard is depth. And what this spiral seminar is, well, the spiral seminar is this introduction to the framework, right? But what we're going to do in the spiral studies in the winter cohort is we are going to create that sense of community. So one thing I want to do is really connect over some sort of physical component. So I have this box that I'm creating for each person that has some of the same things in it, one of them being blue lotus. So everybody's going to be brewing blue lotus flowers before each section, and we will be drinking that tea together. I also have other little things like ritual cards. I have certain crystals, other herbs, other tools essentially to allow you to continue to expand and grow and traverse the realms, because that's what we're doing here. Most of my work is one-on-one with people working on their health, working on complex chronic conditions that are really difficult to solve in 1 to 2 appointments. So when I'm doing something like this, I think about Half Moon and my dream and my vision for Half Moon. I want it to become something that expands so far beyond this one-on-one individual work. My vision actually is to take this podcast and the virtual classroom it creates and truly create a school that will begin as a virtual school but will expand into a literal in-person school, maybe even a renaissance of multiple schools and buildings around the world. And that really excites me. That feels really aligned for me because I'm somebody who loves to work individually with people, but I also like to work on a systems level. The spiral studies is this framework of understanding how reality is constructed, how it is a direct expression of your unconscious belief systems, which are inherited from our ancestors, from our experiences, and we could go on and on about how they come to be, but they are stabilized and reflected in the world around us. And here's the thing about the energy of the spiral of collapse, allowing unwanted patterns to collapse, gives us this full, rich potential energy, which, guess what, can be used for anything that we desire. And this is where these other manifestation techniques come in. So we're also working on actually manifesting or creating or structuring a new reality that just grows through natural force. This is an exploration of Hermetic wisdom, which is in coherence with the laws of nature rather than acting in opposition. And it's something that I've firsthand experienced transform my own life, and I've now firsthand and secondhand experienced the transformation of people in my life, the people who have taken this course, the people who work one-on-one with me, my friends who have taken this course, I've watched this idea truly take on a life of its own. And I think there's something so beautiful about guiding us through that together in winter and providing this opportunity to form these relational connections with one another, to give us this healing sort of resolution, to allow us to connect on a deeper level to these concepts and these ideas and see them reflected in the relationships and in the world around us rather than just going through this course alone. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would say start off by watching the Spiral Seminar if you haven't yet. And if you really do resonate with that, make sure that you're checking your email because I'll be sharing more about that idea really soon. But with that, I'm going to directly allow you to listen to my channeled message from underneath the sequoia tree. I really hope you like it, and I will talk to you next Monday. Hello, Half Moon Academy. I am meeting you from underneath a sequoia tree. I spent the weekend in Sequoia National Park, and I have been completely awestruck and immersed in the sequoia trees. And right now, a family of deer just passed by, and I'm in this hollowed out part of a sequoia tree. And I just want to take a moment to honor these trees and acknowledge them for how ancient and how powerful these beings truly are. If you're somebody that really resonates with nature, I really encourage you to think about indigenous and ancestral ways that we honor nature and honor the land. And one thing that I really like to do is just pause and offer something to the land that I'm standing on. Maybe if I have nothing, I offer a piece of my hair. And if I have a water bottle, I'll add some of my water, or sometimes I'll be more intentional. But this time I just paused before a giant sequoia and I acknowledged them in their familiarity because I was here last year, almost exactly this time last year. I took a solo trip to the sequoias, and this time I am not solo, but I'm still solo right now, just immersing myself in the wisdom. And I want to take this time to really share some of my messages from the sequoia trees, and then also take some time to actually drop into a channel and allow some messages from the sequoias to come through to all of us right now. I'd love to begin though by sharing a poem that I wrote this time last year titled On Growing Slowly. The tree stands after 2,000 years, collecting carbon and light and weaving cellulose in concentric rings. 2,000 years, standing 1 mile into Sierra air as autumn's burning quiets into winter's blanket, melting into spring water and solstice heat. New growth and death again, constellations gliding slowly in silence, the carousel of life, karmic wheel churning, blue rock spinning around pinhole. I imagine Sequoia standing in brush fire, year layering year, heating phloem and xylem as silver silk or ghost or spirit billows up body, arms stretched out in worship. All at once, I receive the lesson of the tree. Everything exists as concentric circles and vertical lines. Pick a direction. Build a trunk that is thick with branches close to the sky, so when fire burns, as it always will, you will still catch the light in the thin mountain air and make something holy from the smoke. 1 year ago, I was here in the sequoias by myself receiving these lessons, these messages from the trees, and this lesson of growing slowly, of making something holy, of being prepared for the burning has truly allowed my year to be one of the most transformative years of my entire life. If you don't know much about the sequoias, imagine a tree. It looks kind of red and it has a very, very wide trunk, a massive, massive trunk, larger than the size of your car. There are sequoias
all around here that vary in size, but right now I'm under one that's probably double the width of my car, and it's stretching so far into the air. And one thing about the sequoias is that their trunk is really thick and really wide, but their branches are up high, up higher into the air. So there's sort of this like stick of the trunk, and then all the way at the top are the branches rather than having branches stretched out below. And like it talked about in the poem, this is for a reason. So the sequoias, when they grow really quickly. They grow really tall. So their goal initially is just to stretch up into the sky, and that allows them to survive the fires because usually the fires on these mountains burn low and close to the ground. And then once they grow tall, they focus on growing wide. So right now, the tree that I'm inside right now, I can look around and I see all of this charcoal completely covering this tree, the base of the tree right now. And I'm looking in front of me at these other sequoias, and they have just char and charcoal along their sides and their base. And what's so beautiful about this is that the sequoias actually evolve by fire. And they actually allow the fire to not be something that necessarily they resist, but it allows them to grow thicker and stronger. They build thick bark in preparation for the fire. What came through to me last year when I was here was I was thinking so much about legacy. So I had the early stages of my business built, and I was really doing something pretty straightforward at the time. I didn't have Half Moon. I didn't have any sort of platform on social media. I was just totally living a pretty normal life and going to naturopathic medical school. I had my HTMA business and I was integrating subconscious work, but I hadn't yet coined my methodology called the Sapphire method, where I really refined what exactly is it that I do, what exactly is my philosophy. So when I was here in the Sequoias, that was actually the first time where I officially launched my program, which I started off 1 year ago as the Elemental Alchemy program, which is kind of crazy to say because that one didn't really last very long. It lasted only a few months before I quickly had to change it into the initiation. And the reason I called it the initiation is because my clients kept changing so quickly and changing their lives so quickly. And I quickly realized that this wasn't something that was coming from me. This was sort of me being the gatekeeper of a channel that many people were already called into and entering into. And when they did that, their lives began to change. So I changed it to the initiation because it felt like such a better fit for what the work actually entailed. Now, last year, the message that I got from the tree was just understanding and sitting and thinking and meditating on what would it be like to be a sequoia tree? What would it be like to stand in one place for 2,000 years or 6,000 years or however old or ancient these trees are? What would it look like to build a trunk that is thick, that's prepared for the fires, that is built with branches close to the sky, so it's always connected to the light and to source, and it's almost like it doesn't even think or consider what's happening low to the ground because it's so stretched up in the sky. And I thought so much about this idea of legacy. Legacy, what does it look like to actually build a legacy? What does it look like? What does it mean to allow all of your work, all of your soul's purpose to blend together into one solid, lasting thing that can stand the test of time? There's this quote that I think I've talked about before that says, "Nothing stands the test of time unless it works." That's something one of my professors always said first year in regards to natural medicine and understanding things like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. These ancient practices have stood the test of time. They've lasted thousands of years because they work. And time itself is this sort of tester. It allows things that are misaligned or not true to pass away. Now, in regards to legacy and in regards to your work, legacy looks like having thick roots. It looks like having a solid trunk, but I'm thinking so much about right now how the sequoia tree grows really quickly in one vertical line first. So it's not necessarily focused on stretching wide and building something really thick at the base first, but the first thing it does is it shoots straight up to the sky and it connects to source. And what I'm getting right now from the tree is just a reminder, where are you connected to? Where are you connected? Where is the source of your work? Where is the source of your legacy? For the tree, if we think about the analogy of the sequoia, they require the sunlight. They require the mountain air. They take in the carbon dioxide and they take in the sunlight. And it's actually, if you're unfamiliar with how trees function, it's actually the evaporation of water at the top of the tree from the needles and the leaves. The evaporation of the evaporation from the light, I mean, is what allows the water to be pulled upward from the root. So think of it like that. Like imagine the branches at the top of the tree and light shining down on all of these branches. And light shining down allows that little bit of water on the leaves to evaporate and go up into the sky. And that drives the water upward from the whole trunk, from the roots. And that allows the natural force of the tree's growth. It begins with connection to light. It begins with connection to source. That's something that I feel like I have been missing a little bit because sometimes for me, I get so focused on my work. I get focused on what is in front of me. And lately, the last month or so, I feel like I've been caught in busyness and monotony and routine. And yes, my life has been fun. And yes, my life is filled with so many good things. And I feel ambitious and I feel inspired. I do feel like right now, my call is actually to tap into source. That is the driving force upward, right? That is what we're trying to stay connected to. That's the purpose of it all, right? Like the tree cannot exist, it cannot grow, it cannot function without the most important thing, being connected to the light, which in this analogy is being connected to God. And I'm thinking right now about these different ways to pray, because prayer is something that can be connecting you to source, right? And when I was a child and a young adult, I always thought about prayer and really sitting and using my words, right? Sitting and using words to articulate a thought to God. And I actually went into a phase maybe 10 or so years ago now where I had a really structured routine for prayer and it became this sort of obligation. And it wasn't until last year, I guess, that I was reconnected with these other forms of prayer. When I was in high school, I actually was a dance teacher at a church, and we talked about dancing as a form of prayer and worship for little kids. I had like kids ages, I think it was 5 to 10, and I would teach them little dance routines to worship songs. And I think about that now in the ways that when I was here last year, I felt so moved by the trees that it made me feel like I wanted to move my body and stretch and dance as an act of worship to trees, but not really the trees, but what they're pointing towards. And I'm thinking right now, being immersed in the Sierras and the mountains right now, all of these vertical lines, that was one of the lines in the poem too. Everything exists as concentric circles and vertical lines. And it's like these mountains are drawn upwards into these points, and these trees are drawn upwards. And what they're doing is they're reminding you to look up. And how rare it is that we look up right now in our modern worlds. Our lives are right in front of us. We actually have these hunched postures a lot of times from looking down at our screens, our phones, our laptops, and we look eye level at people. But how often do we look up at the sky and at trees and how small we really are. And I feel like part of legacy is understanding the smallness that we come from and understanding that original quote that we talked about in the first episode: within everything is the seed of everything. And we begin as a seed. When we look at what we are now, within everything, within us, within our bodies, is the seed of everything. And it is by witnessing that seed and nurturing that seed and allowing it to grow that we allow the act of alchemy or transmutation to take place. It's not about resisting the present moment, it's about allowing ourselves to be transformed into what we already are. It's allowing the seed of that thing to be given what it needs to grow and to be nurtured. And right now, as I sit at the base of a sequoia tree looking upward, I think about my own smallness, and I feel when I organize my body into the tree, I feel my connection to the divine, and I feel my energy being pulled upward and my posture changing. And I don't know where you are right now while you're listening to this, but if you can reorient yourself now to be drawn upward and maybe even to be immersed in a place where you feel compelled and inspired, it's almost like you can't help but look upward. I'm going to sit for one moment. As I sit with this tree and I ask it if it has any messages or words for us right now, I'm just getting to remember the interconnectedness of all things, that nothing grows in isolation. And I'm getting this image right now of the way that the trees, the sequoias, are, and while we look from ground level at these trees seemingly separate from each other, underneath the ground, the trees and the forest and everything in it operates like a web. Everything is interconnected. All of these different legacies and projects are one legacy. Zoomed out, I'm getting this message of renaissance. It's like this entire thing taking over. It's like this source of water, this connection to source. It's like all of these different seeds of the same thing, yet these individual entities, yet the same species, right? All growing, all being drawn upward, all growing really quickly and then growing wide and then building something that can last. And I am getting such a message of hope out of that. And I'm just getting the reiteration of what I was saying of stay connected to source, keep looking up, keep your connection with the divine, whatever that means to you. Keep connection to the light. Because right now we exist in this duality, right? We exist in this illusion of duality with a spectrum within it, yet beyond the third and fourth dimension, we have oneness, we have everything, all that is. And that's really what I feel like the tree experiences, right? It's not experiencing, it feels like these acute black and white moments. It's experiencing the interconnectedness of all things. It's standing here in neutral observation for thousands of years. It's kind of just like allowing yourself to be pulled up, rather than forcing yourself to grow and forcing something to be created, just allowing the actual evaporative force of source itself, God, the light, to sort of pull the growth from you. Kind of this contrast of being rooted in the ground and anchored in the soil and connected to people and projects and places and things that are growing in the same way as you, that are made of the same essence, and then allowing yourself from that rootedness to be drawn up into the light. And that's what I'm getting now. And now I'm going to just sit and be quiet and still and meditate with the sequoia before the sun goes down. And yeah, I thank you so much for listening. I hope this resonated with you, and I will talk to you next Monday.